Crave was conceived as a way to deliver our strong educational mission and our membership's desire for their continued learning. Through the Crave series, our chapter will deliver webinars and virtual meetings to deliver timely and relevant topics that are affecting our industry today.
It's about the effort that we expend to connect with people. But you have an opportunity to see people, you have an opportunity to chat with people. We may not have an opportunity to have appetizers and share a drink with each other, but we stay connected, and that's really the most important thing.
Being able to work together and learn together in a new format, a new environment, really helped us take those pre-existing relationships and friendships that I had to another level.
CoreNet has taken the leadership in these kinds of conversations for years and years, and so we're delighted to have this long-term relationship with CoreNet.
I found the CoreNet to be a great community of dedicated real estate professionals, and what it means to me is it gives me a wider network of people with whom to share ideas, to derive the best learnings, to test and experiment with things that I'm working on.
This program is all about personal growth and becoming the leader that you want to be.
CoreNet has always led the way when it comes to supporting the professional development of our members. Our roundtable discussions, our education workshops, and our professional development programs are just part of what makes CoreNet so valuable to our members. It was critical for us to find a way to still be able to facilitate all of this. Crave has provided us the platform to be just as effective and to still provide that value to our members in a virtual environment.
CoreNet not only provides a platform for different groups to come together regardless where you come from in terms of organization, but really help each member to feel like they belong in this organization.
We have a diverse membership base, and you will find that members come from all walks of life and from all over the world. However, it's still an area of focus for us to improve upon and to embrace equity, inclusion, and diversity through increasing awareness and taking action, as we know this will lead to more success for the organization and for our members. Good afternoon and happy Friday to all of you. Thank you for joining us today for another Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity program. This is one of a series, so please be on the lookout for future information on more programs on neurodiversity. My name is Mark Watkins. I'm the Director of Global Real Estate for Thermo Fisher Scientific. I'm a white male with thinning or shaved red hair and glasses. Today I'm wearing a ski sweater with blue, red, and white, and I use the pronouns of he, him, and his. I'm on the board of directors of CoreNet New England. I also support the finance committee for CoreNet Global. I'm part of the EID committee, which is a team of almost 20 that are busy developing programs like we have today. And we encourage you to provide us with any ideas for future programs. We are all ears on developing programs around topics that you are interested in. I'm going to go through some slides before we start the program. We have some upcoming Crave webinars. On March 12th, can we go back? apologize, there we go. On March 12th, we've got Career Strategies in Development, Success Stories Alumni Panel Reimagined, which sounds like a fantastic program. On March 25th, we have our annual meeting from 5:30 to 7 p.m. You will not want to miss that, so please mark it down in your calendar and be on the lookout for more information on that program. In the next slide. We are very active on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you would like us to add any information for your firms to share, you can email Stephen Smith at Northstar, and he will include that in the social media for Cornet. And on to the next slide. Apologize, everybody. We'd like to thank our corporate partners. And then we'll go on to our sponsors. We'd like to thank our platinum sponsors.
Mark, I have the gold and silver up. I think it's coming in slow for you.
Interesting. Well, I apologize to everybody. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome.
And our silver and gold sponsors.
Q&A.
Okay, so I'm having a delay on my end, so I apologize to everybody. We will have questions and answers. We will be answering these at the end of the program. There is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to ask questions there, and we look forward to being able to answer your questions at the end of the program. We've got about 50 people joining us today, so it's an exciting day for us, and we're excited for the program. So without much further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Colleen Barron. She will be moderating today's program. Dr. Colleen Barron is the Chief Academic Officer at Dunlap Stone University. Dr. Barron holds a Doctor of Education from Northeastern University in Higher Education Administration and a Master of Education in Adult Education. Wow, that's a lot. As a faculty member, she teaches management and organizational behavior and supports graduate research. She is very active in her community. Colleen volunteers with local youth organizations focusing on inclusion and training to make programs accessible to all youth and to equip adult volunteers with the skills that they need to be successful. She founded and coordinates a local autism group that connects families with resources and information and has served as an educational advocate for families with IEPs. She lives with her 2 children, one of whom is on the autism spectrum, and her husband in southeastern Arizona. Please join me in welcoming Colleen to moderate today's program. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Colleen to introduce you to the speakers.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. As Mark said, I'm Colleen Barron, Chief Academic Officer at Dunlap Stone University and Autism Mama. And for our visually impaired guests, I'm a white woman with red, sometimes pink hair and glasses, and my pronouns are she, her. So as a part of your Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity series, we're really concentrating today on how all of these factors come together to make organizations better when we're inclusive. Next slide, please, Debbie. So as a part of this process for you all, you know that design and creating accessible and inclusive spaces is a part of what you all do as CoreNet members. Next slide, please. And I believe this is a graphic that you are all familiar with. The things we can see are just the tip of the iceberg, literally. And there are so many other factors that we need to consider when we think about what diversity and inclusion can look like. Next slide, please. And as you can see, what the goals of this committee are to raise awareness, provide education, and deliver these programs to your members. Next slide. So now I have the tremendous honor to introduce the rest of the panel to you this morning. Dr. Jensen Mecca is Managing Associate at Modern Hire, which is a science-based hiring platform that improves hiring decisions with sophisticated candidate screening, predictive assessments, and interviewing technology. Dr. Mecca leads the assessment design team and manages assessment design, validation, and implementation projects for Fortune 100 clients. Kay Sargent is the Senior Principal and Director of Workplace at HOK. She is an award-winning designer and co-director of their workplace team and is on their board of directors. She helps clients redefine how, when, and where their people work and supports a holistic design approach that integrates organizations' people, processes, and technology. Also with us is Carol Simpson, Executive Director at Orbital Learning, which is a neurodiversity training and consulting service to organizations that provides employment support services to autistic job seekers and employees. She's also representing Focus Professional Services, an IT placement agency that specializes in autistic talent. Next slide, please. So our big topic for today is neurodiversity. And this is an umbrella term that recognizes the diversity of cognitive functioning in humans, or put more simply, that there are differences in how our brains work. You've seen this throughout your whole life, people who can approach the same problem or situation in radically different ways. We know the world and our organizations need people who think differently, and who can think outside of the norms and conventions that might be more prominent in our fields. Often these different ways of approaching things are related to brain differences. And brain differences are as normal as any other type of human variation. Differences in the faces of your friends or in the constellation of your freckles. Next slide, please. So our goal today is to show some of the practical ways you can embrace this concept of neurodiversity and find value in those less typical wiring variations. We want to reframe them as strengths instead of deficits. They're not things that we need to fix or cure. And if we view them this way, we can focus on creating appropriate accommodations that in turn create better organizations and spaces. On this slide, we list just a few of these labels that fall under that neurodiverse umbrella. I'm sure you all know what autism is, and the panel will offer more insights on specific strategies to work with autistic individuals. But autism is characterized by social and communication differences and often sensory sensitivities. Tourette syndrome is characterized by repetitive and stereotyped involuntary movements and vocalizations called tics. Attention deficit disorder with or without the hyperactivity is most commonly diagnosed in children who have challenges with sustained attention or impulsivity, and there are many undiagnosed adults. Dyslexia is difficulty in learning to read or interpret words, letters, or symbols, but there's also dyscalculia, which refers to a wide range of difficulties with math, including difficulty applying mathematical principles to solve problems. If we have words and we have numbers, we also have movement. And dyspraxia affects fine and gross motor skills, motor planning, and coordination. Other brain differences such as epilepsy, Parkinson's, and those with traumatic brain injuries or mood or personality disorders may be viewed through this inclusive lens, which again, We look at differences expected and normal so we can find individual strengths and reasonable accommodations for these individuals. Next slide, please. Of course, there are always challenges. Individuals may not know about their differences or may not be comfortable sharing their diagnosis, depending on how your organization presents itself to the world. But reasonable and thoughtful accommodations for those with brain differences can become just as intuitive to your organizations as accommodations for physical challenges. So this amazing panel is going to walk you through some of the challenges, but also the overwhelming strengths of neurodiverse individuals, how they can be an asset to your organization, how to think about inclusive hiring processes, and how to think about inclusive spaces. Again, we invite you to post in the question and answer portion of the webinar, and I will be bringing those questions to our panel at the end of our presentation. And with that, I would like to turn this over to the amazing Carol Simpson.
Thank you, Colleen. Next slide. So before we start about how you go about hiring people with neurodiverse talents and talking about their amazing strengths, let's discuss some of the challenges around these individuals in the workplace. There are a lot of myths floating out there around what those challenges may be, and sometimes it helps to discuss them explicitly, and therefore you can then assess the risk within your organization. Now, pretty well all of these challenges can be mitigated in the workplace, and that's really important to understand. So, and also too, when you discuss neurodivergent talent, everybody is affected to varying degrees regarding their diagnosis, which leads you to a very complex situation where not everyone presents exactly the same. So for example, I have two sons on the spectrum and they present very differently, to the point where my second son, when he was diagnosed, I was surprised. So some of the challenges that neurodivergent people can have is that, previous slide, please. Adjusting to regular work hours. They tend to be night owls, and getting into a routine can be difficult around getting up at a correct hour to be able to be at work by the start time. Small talk and pleasantries. They may prefer to talk about big subject areas and also areas of interest to them. And when they start talking about interests that are theirs, it can lead to more of a lecture type conversation rather than a dialogue. Joining in activities. And this is not the same as not wanting to join in activities. It's the idea that they have trouble knowing how to join in the activities. Body language, quite often they can have a flat effect, and that's more around messaging between the brain and facial muscles, for example. So what can be happening internally, emotionally in them, is not being reflected on their facial features. Body language, they may not interpret or understand the body language, and they may also prefer to speak their truth without understanding the implications of how that may affect others. And once they understand how it has affected others, they can feel just as badly as any of us can feel when we realize that maybe we have stepped over a boundary and hurt somebody else's feelings. Then there are the sensory issues, the audio, visual, that we will be discussing further. And they like rules, and they will have a tendency to want to ensure that they are enforced. Next slide, please. So task-related challenges, and this has to do with all of these. There are accommodations that can be put in place and management guidance to help the supervisor of the individuals cope with these situations. So ambiguity. what happens is that when you have neurodiverse people in the workplace, everybody starts honing their skills to be able to communicate more clearly. They may have difficulty asking for help or clarification, and so this is where there's extra effort required to reach out and ask them if they are having difficulties. Planning and organizing, all you need to do is let them know when you expect them to start the work, when you expect the work to be finished, and how important it is in comparison to other tasks they've been assigned. Instructions on the fly, you want to make sure that they have understood and acknowledged what you have requested of them. So all of these can be mitigated through very simple accommodations and changes in habits and communications in the workplace. Next slide, please. So the strengths that offset some of those changes that must take effect in the workplace to accommodate those challenges that we just discussed. The compensation is that people who are neurodiverse, it has been proven that they have remarkable cognitive strengths because their brains are wired differently. So their perception is very, very different. Next slide, please. And it appears in superior problem-solving abilities. One of our team members is working at a very large insurance company, and they were nervous about bringing him on board initially. And what they found, though, is that eventually they use him as the role model inside their organization for solving problems. Next slide, please. So it's been proven that they respond to external signals differently. Their integration of different cognitive processes are more honed and independent of one another. And so they are able to look at information in an unfiltered manner and see it for what it is and build up from the details up to a bigger picture and come up with solutions that are based on systemizing what can appear to us to be very disparate pieces of information and pull them together into something meaningful and then articulate a solution. So you look at that and you think, oh, wow, this is amazing. Next slide, please. Feedback that we've received from our clients around the strengths that they've noticed from neurodiverse individuals is their talent for detail, their desire to deep dive into issues and to persevere in resolving those issues. They're honest to, in some situations, it may feel to be to a fault, but they are speaking their truth. And they are results driven. And the very bottom point, they can perform at a productivity rate that is at 140% of your non-neurodiverse individuals and employees, meaning your neurotypicals. Next slide, please. So what has been found is that organizations who diversify, they're 2 times more likely to meet or exceed financial targets. They're 6 times more likely to be innovative. They've had to become innovative internally, and that translates to being innovative and flexible and being able to anticipate changes in the marketplace and respond much more quickly. They also experience lower turnover of staff. It is amazing how individuals in a work environment, rally round and feel more loyal to an organization that has got a social agenda. Millennials today are very much interested in working for organizations that have social agendas, and you'll be able to attract and keep them. And it also improves morale, because as they see these very different behaviors in the workplace, people tend to relax with them and feel more at ease with just being who they are as well. Next slide, please. So processes around hiring and retaining neurodiverse talent do need to be altered. Most organizations, their current processes that they employ are not conducive to attracting individuals who are neurodiverse. So it goes right to the very beginning of the job posting. And we recommend that you waive previous experience, because a lot of these individuals have trouble getting employment, so their previous employment is non-existent. Non-essential skills, usually what happens is that employers will post up everything that they want from a candidate, hoping somebody might fill tick off all the boxes. But what can happen is that people who are neurodiverse, they will look at the job posting, and if they don't have 100% of what is being listed there, they will pre-screen themselves out and they will not apply. As well as education. And this is pretty interesting, is that if the person is able to demonstrate the skill set needed to do the job, and they also demonstrate that they've got a strong aptitude, then is the education as important as the demonstration of those abilities? Many post-secondary institutions are not friendly to neurodiverse individuals, and it can be a real struggle for someone to actually complete a degree, and it has nothing to do with their cognitive abilities, but everything to do with the social and expectations around behaviors in the campuses and the maneuvering through those agendas. Pre-onboarding, be ready for the person that you've selected, and that includes everything set up for them. And it's a good idea to have a job coach, and this is usually an external person, and that job coach is the person who helps the individual you have hired be professionally presentable in the workplace, and also a mentor or a buddy, and that's somebody who can help them understand the dynamics of how your organization works internally, as well as the job coach providing support services to the individual who is neurodiverse. It also provides professional coaching to the team lead and all stakeholders around how to make this person be accepted and as productive as they possibly can be. Or onboarding is just like anybody else, no different. And for retention, again, the job coaching, the expertise from the outside to help you through the process until you have the expertise internally. And through the retention process, it's really important to provide ongoing feedback to your neurodiverse employees. They are not necessarily very good at assessing their own performance, and they will tend to go to a place of that they are not performing well. And it's really important for you to let them know what they're doing well, what they need to improve upon, and these can be really informal chats. As in, thank you, you did a wonderful job on task A, in that it was accurate and it was on time. Thank you. That is good feedback for them to get. Next slide, please. So when we talk about accommodations, organizations can get, well, what does this really mean? What is the cost? And typically the cost is very low. And we're really discussing tools that are readily available in the marketplace. We have one individual who's not only on the autism spectrum, but he's also dyslexic. And we provide him with email templates that he can use, and also the tool Grammarly, and it helps him immensely. So for each individual, you look at what the distractions could be, what their sensory issues could be, and you provide the accommodations that will allow them to be as productive as they are capable of being. Next slide, please. And at this point, I am very pleased to hand over to Jensen, and she will take it from here.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carol. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. And I guess for folks who aren't able to see my video, I'm a white woman with brown hair and glasses. Today I'm wearing a black cardigan with flowers, and my pronouns are she, her. My background is in industrial organizational psychology, which I think is the biggest possible mouthful anyone could come up with to refer to psychology applied to the workplace. So folks with my background use research and methodology from the psychology field to measure and try to improve things like well-being in the workplace, performance, and in my particular career, primarily selection, pre-hire selection for folks who are coming into the job. So I wanted to sort of speak to just generally some best practices around selecting new employees as we would see it from an IO psychology standpoint, which from what we've just learned, I believe are not very different at all from the best practices for hiring a neurodiverse workforce. So wanted to share a little bit about that foundation as we consider what some of the changes might be and how those can really help to improve the hiring process more generally. So my professors in grad school would be extremely unhappy with me if I didn't say that every selection process should start with a very detailed job analysis. So that may seem like common sense that you have to know what the job is before you can hire someone to do it, but he would be surprised how many organizations don't put a ton of thought into that. Or a ton of detail into that process. So there are lots of different ways to do a job analysis, but the goals are to identify the main knowledge, skills, and abilities that someone needs to have in the role in order to be successful. So we can use job descriptions, surveys, interviews, actually shadowing someone on the job to the extent that we're able to do that today, to learn everything that we can about the job so that we can identify, first of all, what are we looking for in the selection process, and then design tools that measure those things or select tools that measure those things. So oftentimes that might be an interview, but there are lots of other ways to measure performance before hiring. And that's what my organization or my team on my organization does a lot of. So designing assessments that could include lots of different types of measures. And if you'll go to the next slide, I think that these recommendations are very much in line with what Carol shared about best practices for a neurodiverse population of candidates. So trying to avoid measuring characteristics that aren't essential to the job. So sometimes we default to measuring what's easiest during the selection process, like looking at a resume for work history and education. That's very simple, very easy to do, but may not actually be getting you the most important information about what a candidate can do that you might really need to have in order to predict their success on the job. And so instead of doing that, emphasizing aptitude strengths, proof of skills, so skills tests, work samples, that type of assessment to really measure what the candidate can do and really predict job performance. So that keeps you from screening out neurodiverse candidates who could do very well on the job, but more broadly, it can help you hire applicants who are likely to be successful in a job regardless of their neurodiversity status. So that could also help prevent screening out candidates based on any other way in which they might be diverse that would not in any way prevent them from doing a wonderful job in the workplace. Another element of job analysis that I think is important to consider is that it's an opportunity to engage folks in your workforce already who are neurodiverse in the process of supporting the hiring process. So learning more about how folks on the roll now are flourishing and the most important ways to support both new hires and also candidates can be a really valuable part of that job analysis. So on the next slide, you can see just a little bit about my organization. So just to provide some context for where I'm coming from with that, we provide assessments and interview tools that sit at the very top of the funnel. So a lot of the time it's before you've interacted with the candidate face-to-face or even sometimes done a phone or a video interview. Our particular products sit at the very top of the funnel. So a lot of the time I'm getting to do that sort of job analysis, learning about roles, and helping to identify the most important things to measure to try and predict on the job performance. And on the next slide, you can see a little bit about just kind of what our principles are. And I think these are the things that define our work. But even if you're not, creating a big assessment battery or doing something at scale, these are principles that you can employ as you think about how to hire new candidates that can help you from inadvertently screening out folks who might be not neurotypical. So one of the things that we try to do is facilitate a two-way information exchange with candidates. So folks who are going through a selection process are providing a lot of information to employers. And a lot of the time, employers don't capitalize on the opportunity to provide a lot of information back to candidates at the same time. So that's a benefit of something like a work sample or a skills test. You can show candidates a little piece of what the job will be like, not only so that you can see how they would do in that situation, but so that they can learn a little bit about the job and make a more informed decision about whether it's the right fit for them. And as we learned from Carol, sometimes folks who are on the spectrum may interpret things in a more literal black and white way. So providing an actual example of what the job is like in the context of your hiring process can be very valuable as compared with sort of the corporatese way that oftentimes we talk about things in a job description that might not be as clear. So that's another opportunity to communicate and provide a lot of information to folks as they come into the job. We also try to measure performance in a lot of different ways. So that's where those skills tests come into play, job simulations, but we also measure other characteristics that are important to the job as evidenced by our job analysis. So there are lots of different options for doing that depending on what your role looks like. On the next slide, I have just a quick video, and I'm going to ramble over top of it, showing another portion of our process and something that is valuable from a communication standpoint. And it looks like it may not want to play the video. That's okay. No problem. But another element of our typical assessment battery is to share a little bit about the role up front in what we call a realistic job preview. So again, in addition to a work sample, that's an opportunity to talk about the job in a very clear black and white way, describing both the things that people love about the job and also the things that they find more challenging. So again, an opportunity to communicate very clearly about the expectations on the role to help everybody make a more informed decision about whether it's the right fit for them, and particularly candidates who may have a difficult time sort of inferring that type of information from a job description or from an early communication with a recruiter. And then the next slide displays maybe a video or maybe just a still image of what a job simulation might look like. So in this particular example, sorry about that. We are interested in measuring cognitive ability, but instead of providing an assessment that just looks like the SAT, we provide, and if the video were cooperating with me today, you would see some different resources that we provide to candidates, like a profit and loss statement, the types of tools that they would actually be using on the job, and then questions that ask them to interpret those tools. So again, this is a way to learn about candidates by actually asking them to do what they'll be asked to do on the job. So they can see what the job is like, and you can understand their actual abilities without having to sort of sift through filters of communication differences or sort of the distance between a typical cognitive ability measure and what's really needed on the job. And we do have a couple of examples of, if you'll just keep clicking until you see 3 blue bars. Sorry, I didn't realize this was so animation heavy. And just a couple more clicks if you don't mind. We do see that these types of assessments, perfect, that looks finished. They do predict performance on the job. So there's not a sacrifice in switching from something more traditional to this type of assessment when it pertains to then the caliber of the employee that you get. So if you're actually laser focused on predicting the skills that you need to predict and not measuring a lot of what we call content irrelevant variance or noise in the system, especially noise that's related to someone's neurodiversity, but that isn't going to stop them from doing a great job in the role, you can really do a lovely job of predicting performance. And then the next slide, and again, there may be a couple of extra clicks. No, we're good on that one. Sorry about that. We can also predict turnover really well if we are measuring what the job actually looks like and collecting that type of information. So I know that was a ton of information. I look forward to discussing more if we have the opportunity at the end of the session today. But in the meantime, I'm excited to turn it over to Kay for our next segment.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, ladies, for queuing all that great information up. I'm Kay Sargent. I am a middle-aged white female. And if you can go back one slide, I'd appreciate it. We at HOK, for the last 4 years, we really have been focusing a lot on neurodiversity and how do we create environments where people can be successful. And it really started by a conversation that we had with a client who asked, how do we create spaces for people that might have ADHD? And in all of the discussions we have, I think this is one of the quotes that we love the most, that we are freshwater fish. But we're put in salt water. And if you put us in fresh water, we'll function just fine. But in salt water, we will struggle to survive. And I think it's, that old saying of a fish out of water. We believe as designers, we have a huge responsibility to create environments where everybody really can be successful and can focus on their key attributes. And I think one of the things that has been touched on a little bit is people that are neurotypical tend to fall in a predictable range of responses to stimulation, where people that tend to be neurotypical or neurodivergent tend to either be hypersensitive, meaning they can't take too much stimulation, they don't like environments with bright lights or strong smells or too much tactile stimulation. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have people that are hyposensitive, meaning that they actually need additional stimulation. They need to fidget, they need to move, and if they're constrained for too long, then they become very, very uncomfortable in those environments or in those spaces. And so the stimulation is really coming at us in multiple ways, whether it's acoustical stimulation or visual stimulation, whether it's tactile or even temperature. It can be our smells, and it can also be in how close we are to each other. Now, in the COVID era, we would argue that everyone, even neurotypicals, have a heightened sensitivity to their surroundings that are making us much more acutely aware of what is happening around us. And so the onus is on us even more to think about how do we create these environments. And so if you look at this chart, you can see at the top you have hyposensitive, you have hypersensitive, and then we have all of those different sensory stimulations coming at us, and each one you can have a different reaction to. And so the only way that we can really accommodate people today is to create kind of this ecosystem of options and choices across the entire portfolio so that individuals can find the type of space that fits their needs. And again, it's not just for people that are neurodivergent. When you design for the extreme, you benefit the mean. And everyone can be better off in these environments that give them options and choices and more ways to kind of find the right setting for themselves in the space. So on our research, go back one more, please. In our research, we really looked at the 6 modalities of work. Sorry, go forward one. Thank you. So we really looked at the modalities of work. And there's 6 things that we're really kind of doing in the workplace. We're concentrating, we're doing process work that we might be able to do in an open space or with others around that doesn't take in deep concentration, but still it's kind of solo work. Then there's the creative things that we're doing. There's meeting or congregating. There's contemplating and refresh. And then, of course, there's the social interaction that we're doing. So when we look at those 6 modalities of work, and then we start to say, all right, how do we create a hyper and a hypo version for each one of those? We actually can create this whole kit of parts that really supports the diversity that we're encountering today. So I'm going to start on the left and just give you that one example. I think most companies today probably have some of those quiet spaces or heads down concentrative areas, and that's great, but we need to design those so that we're cutting out any distractions. Often designers get really excited and they want to make those bright, fun spaces, bold patterns, bold colors, and that's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing, right? Because too much stimulation is overwhelming individuals. Now, if you go to the bottom side of that, if you take someone that is hyposensitive and you put them in those small phone booths, they literally will be bouncing off the walls and they can't handle that, right? So they might need a space where there's fidget furniture or they can move and they're not boxed in, but they're somewhat shielded from the surroundings so that they can kind of focus in their own way. And on the right side of that, you have those social spaces. You know, again, some people want to be right in the middle of everything, where other people just kind of want to be off to the side and have a little bit more control of their surroundings and the interactions within the space. And so we believe really strongly that these are not destinations, right, that we should be designing, but that they need to be seamlessly woven in to truly create inclusive spaces, just like we do with physical disabilities, right? And that allows everybody to access these spaces without any kind of stigmatism or being called out. And even in a space as small as this, we can create a variety of options and settings where people can have their pick of where to go. And we will naturally migrate to those spaces that feel the most comfortable for us. So for instance, if you're one of these people that doesn't like to sit with your back to an opening, you're going to migrate towards a certain area of this plan versus maybe some of the other spaces. And so this really enables everyone to find the types of spaces that really address their specific needs. And even in like a small neighborhood like this, we can address the hypersensitive and the hyposensitive versions of those modalities of work and create vibrant spaces where people really can thrive and find the types of settings that work best for them. Because we believe that there is a compelling human and business case to be made to approaching designing workplaces that really address mindfulness, health, safety, well-being, and inclusivity. We have an obligation to do so, to create spaces where people really can thrive because they can bring so much to the organization and to the teams. And we believe that we are no longer just designing environments, but we're really designing the experience. And that's on the onboarding, that's on the HR identification, that's bringing people into the workspace, but then also helping them feel successful and supported once they're there. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for some questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Kay. So I'm going to invite our other panelists to bring their video and microphones back online. Again, I want to remind you, we have the Q&A portion at the bottom menu, and you're welcome to put any of those into the chat. I know we've hit you with a fire hose of information here. It's a lot to take in, and I'm sure you're all clicking through. How can you adjust business processes to be more inclusive? So with that, I would like to ask each of you to take a short stab at what you think the first approach is a company that is thinking about how to improve their neurodiversity. What is that first step that you would recommend to each of them?
So I'll take that from a space planning standpoint. I'm going to let Carol and Jensen really speak about the onboarding and the staffing and the HR issues. But if you're a facilities management or a real estate individual, I think you need to take a long, hard look at your spaces. And if you have rows and rows of identical work points where people don't have a lot of options or choices and they're stuck in one space, that probably misfits the majority of people. And so the number one thing I would say is assess what you have and ensure that you're providing an environment that gives lots of options and choices and puts the control in the individual's hands to find the types of settings that are going to be the most amenable to them, and making sure that you're offering those types of settings in your workplace.
And I can answer it from the idea of setting up an initiative inside the organization to neurodiversify. And the overall first step recommendation is to bring in experts around how to do it. And there are many organizations throughout the US and Canada who can help you with that. And some of them specialize in very specific areas of neurodiversity. For example, their area of expertise is autism, or their area of expertise is learning disabilities. And then they can also be specialized in sectors. So for example, my one organization, Focus, we actually provide talent on the autism spectrum into STEM jobs. So tech, engineering, those kinds of jobs. So look for that expertise, and they will help you through the process, because there's a huge learning curve. And I always relate this to a story about my own personal life. When my sons were diagnosed, a behavior interventionist phoned me and said that she was going to meet and discuss what needed to be learned. And my response was, do you want my sons to attend that meeting? And she said, no, you're the one who needs the training. So I look at that and say, okay, employer, here we go, and enjoy it, because it is a really immersive experience in which you learn so much about people and the human condition.
Absolutely. And I think I will probably sound like a broken record with this one, but I would say that the first step purely from a hiring selection standpoint would be to conduct job analysis for any job where you're about to employ a new selection system. That's a great way to make sure that you aren't screening folks out based on characteristics on the job you don't really need, and is a way to make your selection system fairer, both for neurodiverse populations and for just diverse populations more generally. So that's just a wonderful first step for any of these initiatives.
Thank you all. We had the question come across the chat. Do you find that more companies are adjusting their business processes to include neurodiversity? I would say, based on this panel's presentation today, yes. Even if you don't know that you have a neurodiverse employee, you probably already do. And so you've probably been making some of these accommodations along the way. Carol, you had touched on what some of the common accommodations that businesses can offer are. Would you like to highlight just a few others that maybe you weren't able to fully address in your presentation?
All right, so Kay mentioned, the open office concept, and that is a big one. Most people who are neurodiverse do not like that open concept. And they also like to have a workspace that is assigned to them. So there's a lot of hoteling now inside organizations, and people on the spectrum in particular like to know exactly where they're going to be sitting every single day. That routine gives them a context in which to be productive. But some of the accommodations are things like noise canceling headsets, desk dividers that cut off visual distractions. And all of these are really inexpensive. A good set of noise canceling headsets, top, maybe $200-300. And so we're not talking a huge expense. Going back to the comment about businesses accommodating people on the spectrum, what we have found is that once a company has hired their first known neurodiverse individual, they are then much more open to changing their business practices because they have experienced the benefits directly.
So I got to tag in here because I think there's a really important thing that Carol brought up that appears to be a conflict. So as the designer on the plan, I want to say a few things. First of all, open environments and open plan are different things. Just because an environment is more open does not mean that everybody is assigned to a work point, which is truly what open plan is. And yes, there are some individuals that do not like those environments, but not all. Okay. The challenge here is that multiple people have multiple different reactions. And if you're doing everything the same for everyone, you will fail. And so just because some people want an assigned desk does not mean everybody does. And that is the kiss of death for a lot of people because it means every work point has to be the same. So in an ideal world, and ladies, tell me if I'm wrong here, I would suggest that you you identify what are the real types of work that are actually happening, work style assessment, okay, figure that out. Then look at those 6 modalities, make sure you have a mix of those settings, but that they're heavily geared towards the type of work that is being done. And then you create a variety of options so that if somebody wants to have a desk with higher panels that is assigned to them and they have that level of predictability, they can have that. But it doesn't mean that everybody has to have that. And so creating this variety or ecosystem of spaces is really, really critical. And one of the things we'll say is the second you go assigned, then 90% of the time, all the work points have to be the same, right? You have to be equal. But if you go unassigned in a neighborhood environment, so people have a home base, and then there's smaller groups of people in those neighborhoods, and they can say, you know what? Kay really is a creature of habit, and I don't even have to be neurodivergent to be a creature of habit. I might just be one of those types of people that I have to have predictability and order, okay? And so we're going to say she's probably going to sit in this work point the majority of the time. Let's just let her do that. But you can't be a squatter because we still want to, we still want to have the clean desk policies and things so that it doesn't prohibit cleaning and all those other things that are factors that we could dive into that we haven't even touched on in this presentation. And so creating that ecosystem is really, really critical. One size misfits all.
And I think there are other things we need to keep in mind as far as this giant umbrella of neurodiversity that we're talking about. So those who may have processing differences around reading or speaking or composing emails may want to use voice recognition software, as Carol had in her slides, some of those editing tools that can point out those errors to maintain professional communication. Those who have seizure disorders might not have the capacity to take anything other than public transportation to work. So we need to think about them in scheduling. And there are different ways that we can help individuals identify what their needs might be, and then create specific accommodations. As I said in my introduction, I know this feels very overwhelming at this point, but all of your organizations have probably already been doing this for physical disabilities. And so we want to just open up our framework of how we think about what reasonable accommodations are in order to tailor them to this very vast group of differences. And again, they're differences, they're not problems. They're the diversity we would expect to see in a large group of people. All right. Mark noted that many companies are forming ERGs, and companies are creating them for neurodiverse employees, or are they forming these? And is there a concern with creating a specific group for them? In other words, is it best to have them blended fully into the organization, or should we be creating specific work groups for our neurodiverse employees?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the term ERG. It's not something that we use in Canada. So what is that?
I am happy to explain it. An ERG is an employee resource group where companies are forming them for people with disabilities, veterans, for Asian Americans, and they are able to form groups and actually put on presentations and network amongst themselves. And the presentations can be for the whole company, and many times they are. And they're very inclusive. It's not an exclusive group, but so that they're able to communicate and better understand what works well for them, to help develop solutions to make the company more successful. So to your point, understanding what type of work environment works best for them, so then we can work as a company to get the noise canceling headphones or design the workstations that make them comfortable, productive, bringing them their best selves to work every day.
So I'm gonna tag in here and say that when we started our research, what we found is that there is not a lot on this topic. There is a ton of information about how to deal with in the built environment about school-age children. But again, a lot of people that are older, in the older generation, it was never diagnosed. And so there's a whole ton of people out there that are neurodivergent that don't even know they are. So that's problem number one, okay? Then you've got companies like SAP, Ernst & Young, Microsoft that have very, very targeted programs, and these ladies could go on for hours about those, that really say we are going to hire people with a specific skill set. Like Microsoft has an autistic program, and they've shown that their ability to get to that hyper focus has made them amazing coders and programmers, and they can literally be 192% more productive than their coworkers, which is just staggering. Okay, but there's a whole group of people out there that don't know it. So if you were to set up a group like that, which I don't think is a bad idea to do, first of all, a lot of people don't even know they are, and there's also some stigmatism. So we have to work to eliminate the stigmatism around this, so that more people are willing to come out and say, yeah, I have ADHD, or yeah, I have, et cetera, and work a little bit harder. But we also have to understand that there are going to be people that aren't going to self-identify or don't know. And so anything and everything that we do that accommodates the mass population will ultimately benefit people that may not identify right now.
We had another question in the chat, and I'd like to kind of direct this one to Jensen. Do you recommend a company start with one department where the specific job needs can be detailed and the environment controlled or designed for a neurodiverse candidate? Or should the company make broader commitment to inclusive practices regarding hiring neurodiverse candidates? Like, is it a chicken egg kind of a question?
That's exactly where my mind went, and that I don't think they are mutually exclusive. So I think it's possible to take steps more broadly to be more accommodating, while also maybe if it's a brand new job, you're just hiring for the first time into a particular position, that's an opportunity to pilot a program where you pay special attention to this type of topic. So I would say it's difficult, I know, to walk and chew gum at the same time, but I think it's important to and likely beneficial to try to do both at once. Um, Given that, as you mentioned, sort of from a chicken and egg standpoint, the learnings from the specific focused group can benefit the organization more broadly.
Hey, Jansen, I have to tag in here. I think you and I, when we were talking about this, talked about several months ago, maybe 2 months ago, Anderson Cooper did a special on 60 Minutes, and he talked about screening processes for people that are autistic in certain jobs. And it's a skill assessment test. And he took the skill assessment test and failed miserably. Like, he couldn't identify the patterns, he couldn't put them in order, etc. Where somebody that was neurodiverse, it was like they like saw the pattern, picked it up. I mean, just they think differently, right? And I think there's so much about that process of skill assessments that really should be more broadly applied to every job, because every job requires different skill sets. And just looking at a resume and asking some questions is not even scratch the surface for 90% of the people that are out there, whether you're neurodiverse or not. And I just thought that was fascinating. That's a good, go watch 60 Minutes and you'll see that segment with Anderson Cooper. It's great.
Yes, and that's absolutely kind of one of our design principles, or our design philosophy for our assessments, is that there are different skills and abilities are important for different jobs. Obviously, I feel like that's intuitively true, but that doesn't often we fall back on what's easiest to do, which is look at a resume or conduct a phone screen, where there are things that are equally time efficient, that are more beneficial to applicants, and also from which you can get a lot richer information. So I absolutely agree.
We had someone in the chat note that we have this perception that assistive technology or these different accommodations are expensive, and generally they are not. Especially, we've all developed the tools and tricks and the things that we need individually to function and do well in our job. And we all know the things that kind of drive us crazy along the way. And so I think most adults, we all have our little peculiarities, our own brain differences. So I think there's a lot to be said for, you're probably already doing a lot of these things, right? But we also just want to be cognizant of, as Jensen said, not screening them out, or Carol, not looking at these as negative traits, but focusing on strengths. And Kay, designing spaces that work for all of our employees and all of our workflows and processes.
Well, Colleen, look, for anybody that's getting a question about expense, I'm going to say this. 80% of a company's money goes to their people. 80%. Okay, only 10% goes to IT and 10% goes to real estate. So when people say, oh, that's going to cost too much in IT or real estate, anything that we're doing that is negatively impacting people's ability to be effective and efficient, and to get the right people on board and to make them as productive and creative and innovative as possible, is costing a company money, right? We don't think about that. And so what we need to be thinking about is stop worrying about the HR or the IT cost or the real estate cost. That's a small percentage. What you need to focus on is, how do we make the people, your true asset, as effective as they can be to really plow us forward as a company. That's what you should be worried about.
And I support Kay's comment there 100%. $200 for a noise canceling headset, and you've got somebody who's operating at 50% greater productivity than their cubicle partner. It doesn't get measured, but that is what should be measured, is that productivity.
All right, folks, we have about 5 minutes left in our presentation. Can you believe we've been at this for this long? Again, I know it's a lot of information that we are bringing to you. Our next question is the federal government or state government allowing funds or tax credits focusing on diversity programs? I think this is obviously going to depend on exactly where you are and what the specific needs of the individual are. There are some workforce development organizations that can supply additional funding for these programs, but I'm going to open that up to the panel. Jensen, do you know of any specific programs?
Gosh, I don't. I was about to ask Carol, but I feel like you probably are more familiar with Canadian programs, and I would imagine the answer might be a little bit different in the US. So I am not quite sure.
Yes, like in Canada, and I am familiar with a little bit about the states as well, but not as much. But typically, federal and in the states would be state legislation. There's a huge push going on around employment and people who are challenged in getting employment. So if with a little bit of investigation, I'm sure you're going to find that there are all kinds of programs out there and financial assists that are beneficial to the employer to tap into.
I'd say look to Europe, because Europe, ladies, I don't know about your experience, but when we were doing all of our research for this, there are a lot more programs in European countries around the HR element and the onboarding and the bringing in. We found almost nothing related to space and space guidelines outside of K through 12 schools. When it came to workplace, it was like, okay, you're on your own, right? Which is why we did a lot of the research that we did. But in Europe, there are a lot of countries that have been very, very proactive about this. The BBC, there was a huge article just the other day about the BBC and them, what they're doing across their portfolio, et cetera. So that's where I'd look.
Yes, and in fact, my colleague Trina is joining from Ireland today, and she mentioned that the Irish government allows funding for assistive tech and for training in D&I. So, case in point, look to Europe as in all things for examples of great ways to do things.
This is probably more of one of our CoreNet Fellows questions. Will the slides be available to the participant viewers? I believe they will be. I believe a recording of this is going to be available afterwards as well. All right, ladies, as we come to the end here, give me a quick sentence on why companies should look to neurodiverse candidates and employees. I'm going to start with Kay.
I'm going to say because you already have them in your workplace and you're already not setting them up for success. And if we haven't convinced you that from an ethical and moral standpoint, this is the right thing to do, let me give you a little bit more fuel for your fire. Neurodiversity is considered a disability under the ADA. If an employee knocks on your door tomorrow and says, I'm autistic, I'm ADHD, I'm on the, whatever, I need special accommodations, you are required under law to provide them. And most HR professionals right now and most corporate real estate professionals would have no idea what to do. And right now, because there's such a stigmatism around this, people aren't doing that. But that stigmatism is coming off because we have a whole generation that has been raised with an acute knowledge of what their needs are and is not afraid to ask for them. So it's coming and you better be prepared.
And I'd like to add to that, it's not a matter of if you should neurodiversify, it's a matter of when. So the sooner you get on board, the better equipped you are going to be to really be able to leverage on that organizational learning.
Yep, and I would say to Kay's point earlier, the solutions that you could put in place that benefit folks on the neurodiverse spectrum benefit all employees, and the elements of your hiring practice that you can make fairer with neurodiversity in mind are also fairer for all applicants. So there's no downside to prioritizing neurodiversity, and obviously many upsides.
Well, ladies, thank you all so much for being a part of this. We've had some great feedback on how much folks have enjoyed your presentation today. With that, I'm going to invite Mark to come back on and give us some closing thoughts as we finish up this session.
Wow. I think that you've given us a lot of tools to put into our toolbox. Well, I know that you have. First off, sorry that I had put some notes into the chat. I clearly am used to Microsoft Teams, and in any event, I apologize for that. We can't thank you enough for joining us today. This has been incredibly educational. So thank you for joining us. A special thanks to Stacy Chambers and Gretchen Barron, who worked with you to help put this program together for our members. I loved the analogy of freshwater fish put into salt water. I think that we all can relate. And to Kay's point, there's probably a lot more people than we think. And lastly, as Kay also said, and in the words of Spike Lee, it's the right thing to do.